Graham Westfield thought he was just checking on an old barn in a storm. He was wrong. What he found inside wouldn't just shatter the quiet solitude he'd spent 5 years building. It would drag him back into a war he thought he'd left buried in the desert sands 2 decades ago. The rain came down in sheets, a gray wall of water that turned the Montana ranchlands into a sea of mud. Thunder cracked overhead, sounding like artillery fire, a sound Graham knew all too well. He pulled his truck to a stop near the old barn on the far edge of his property, its silhouette a hunched shadow against the bruised sky. He wasn't supposed to be out here. This barn was slated for demolition, a relic of the previous owner. But a flash of lightning had shown him something impossible. A light. A flicker from inside the condemned structure. Probably just vagrants, he thought, grabbing the heavy mag light from his glove compartment. Or teenagers looking for a place to drink. He could handle either. His hands, calloused from a lifetime of hard work, were steady. His face, etched with the kind of lines that come from staring into too much sun and seeing too much darkness, was a mask of calm. At 52, Graham was an empire unto himself, a man who commanded 10,000 acres of prime Montana land with the same cold precision he'd once commanded a special forces unit. He'd bought this isolation, paid for it with the fortune he'd made after the military, and then paid for it again with the loss of his wife, Sarah. 5 years ago, another storm, a spooked horse, a tragic fall. Since then, the silence of the ranch had been his only companion. He preferred it that way. Emotion was messy. Solitude was clean. He slid the heavy barn door open, its groan lost in the roar of the wind. The air inside was thick with the smell of wet hay and something else. Something metallic and wrong. Fear. His beam cut through the gloom, landing on a figure huddled in the far corner. At first, he thought it was a pile of rags. Then the rags moved. A woman. Young, emaciated, her dress torn and stained. Her eyes, wide and terrified, caught the light. But it wasn't her fear that made the air leave Graham's lungs. It was the chain. A heavy, rusted chain snaked from a thick iron ring bolted to the wall, ending at a cuff around her ankle. And then he saw it. The unmistakable swell of her belly beneath the thin fabric. She was pregnant. He took a slow step forward, keeping his hands visible. "I'm not going to hurt you." His voice was low, the same calm, measured tone he used on spooked cattle. The woman flinched, scrambling back against the damp wood, a broken animal sound escaping her throat, one arm wrapped protectively around her stomach. Graham stopped. His mind, trained for tactical assessment, took in the scene. The angry red marks around her wrists and other ankle. The dark, ugly bruises blooming on her skin like poisonous flowers. And something else. Something on her wrist, peeking from under a torn sleeve. A mark. Not a bruise, but a deliberate, seared brand. His blood ran cold. He'd seen that brand before, just once. In a place he had spent 20 years trying to forget. A black site interrogation room in a country that didn't officially exist. On a man who was supposed to be a ghost. This wasn't just a woman in trouble. This was a message. This was a ghost from his past, knocking on his door in the middle of a Montana thunderstorm. He had thought he was retired. He had thought he was safe. But as he looked at the brand on her wrist, a stylized scorpion with its tail coiled into a perfect circle, he knew. The war had followed him home, and it had just chained itself to the floor of his barn. Graham's mind raced, overriding the shock with cold, hard training. The brand wasn't just a symbol, it was a signature. The calling card of a man named Alistair Finch, a brilliant, charismatic, and utterly sociopathic officer who had been Graham's commander on a single, disastrous Black Ops mission. The mission had gone sideways, ending in a cover-up so deep that Alistair was officially listed as killed in action. Graham knew better. He knew men like Alistair didn't die. They just disappeared, taking their monsters with them. And now, one of Alistair's monsters was here. He backed away slowly, pulling out his phone. He didn't call 911. You don't call the local cops when a ghost from a deniable op shows up on your doorstep. You call the only people you can trust. He punched in a number. "Miguel," he said when his foreman answered. "Get the truck, the big one with the bolt cutters, and bring the emergency med kit from the house. No questions." He hung up and turned his attention back to the woman. "I'm going to get you out of there," he said, his voice a low rumble of absolute certainty. He moved to an old crate and sat down, a careful distance away, making himself smaller, less threatening. He started talking, not about the chain or the brand, but about the rain, the ranch, the way the mountains looked after a storm. He was weaving a net of normalcy, trying to pull her back from whatever abyss she was staring into. Her eyes darted between him and the barn door, calculating, assessing. This was no ordinary victim. He saw it in the way she positioned herself, keeping the wall at her back, her eyes constantly scanning for threats and exits. She was a survivor. Alistair only ever chose survivors. The headlights of the truck cut through the rain-swept darkness. Miguel, a man whose loyalty had been forged in the same desert fires as Graham's, appeared at the door. He was shorter, broader, with a quiet competence that needed no words. He took in the scene in a single glance, the woman, the chain, the look on Graham's face. His expression hardened. He handed the bolt cutters and the med kit to Graham without a word, then stepped back outside, pulling out his own phone. Graham knew who he was calling. Doc Helena, the tough, no-nonsense doctor who looked after the ranch hands, and then Sheriff Patterson, but only to give him a carefully worded heads-up. They had a language without words, he and Miguel. "My name is Graham," he said to the woman, holding up the bolt cutters so she could see them. "I'm going to cut that chain now." He moved slowly, deliberately. As he knelt, the stench of infection and despair hit him, but his face remained a neutral mask. He positioned the jaws of the cutters around the thick chain link. The woman flinched but didn't scream. She watched him, her breathing shallow and ragged. As he applied pressure, she whispered a single word, so quiet he almost missed it in the thunder. "Cyclops." Graham froze. The cutters bit into the metal, but his world tilted on its axis. Cyclops. It wasn't a word. It was a code name. The designation for Alistair's secret project. A project so dark, so illegal, that its very existence had been scrubbed from every record. A project focused on human potential, on creating the perfect asset through a brutal combination of training and trauma. Graham had been tasked with shutting it down, but he'd only ever managed to scatter its architects to the wind. He snapped the chain. It fell to the floor with a dull thud. The woman didn't move. She just stared at him, her eyes holding a flicker of something other than fear. It was recognition. She knew what the word meant, and she knew that he knew. This changed everything. She wasn't just a random victim Alistair had branded. She was part of the project, a high-value asset, and her escape wasn't just a bid for freedom. It was a declaration of war against her creator. Miguel reappeared in the doorway. "Doc's 10 minutes out. Sheriff's on alert but staying back." He paused, looking at Graham. "What is this, viejo?" Graham stood up, backing away to give the woman space. He tossed her a thermal blanket from the kit. "It's the past, Miguel," he said, his voice grim. "The part I never told you about." The woman's hand trembled as she reached for the blanket, but as she pulled it around her shoulders, a small, folded piece of paper fell from a hidden pocket in her torn dress. It was so small, so insignificant, it could have been a piece of trash. But she subtly kicked a piece of straw over it, her eyes flicking to Graham for a split second. A message. A dead drop. Right here, right now. The game had already begun. She wasn't just a survivor, she was a player. And she had just chosen her side. While Doc Helena worked on the woman in the guest room of the sprawling ranch house, a room that hadn't been used since Sarah's death, Graham returned to the barn. The storm had lessened to a steady drizzle. Under the pretense of checking the structure, he knelt where the woman had been chained. His fingers found the small folded paper. It was damp, fragile. He carefully slipped it into his pocket, his heart hammering against his ribs. Back in his study, a room paneled in dark wood and smelling of old leather and whiskey, he locked the door. Miguel stood guard outside. It was an old habit from their operational days, falling back into roles they thought they'd shed. He unfolded the paper under the glow of his desk lamp. It wasn't a note. It was a schematic. Drawn with a precise, steady hand, it depicted a complex ventilation system. Notes were scribbled in the margins, not in English, but in Czech. Numbers indicated airflow, pressure points, and structural weaknesses. At the bottom was a set of coordinates. Graham felt a chill that had nothing to do with the storm. This was an escape plan, not her escape plan. This was an architectural blueprint for a facility, with its vulnerabilities clearly marked. She hadn't just escaped a prison, she had brought the keys to its destruction with her. He pulled up a satellite map on his encrypted laptop and punched in the coordinates. They pointed to a remote, privately owned estate about 100 miles north, near the Canadian border. The property was registered to a shell corporation, a ghost company with no discernible owner. Alistair's signature move. He leaned back, the leather of his chair groaning. The woman in his guest room wasn't just a participant in Project Cyclops. Her knowledge of architecture, her ability to memorize and replicate schematics under extreme duress. They had chosen her for her skills. They hadn't just broken her, they had tried to weaponize her mind. A knock on the door. It was Doc Helena, her face grim. "She's stable for now," Helena said, closing the door behind her. "Severe dehydration, malnutrition, the baby's heartbeat is surprisingly strong, but she's a fortress, Graham. I've never seen anything like it. The way she watches, the way she assesses, it's not the fear of a victim, it's the vigilance of a soldier." "What did she tell you?" Graham asked. "Nothing. Not her name, not a single word. But when I was cleaning her wounds, she gave me this." Helena held up a small evidence bag. Inside was a single long strand of dark hair. "It's not hers. She had it clenched in her fist so tight I almost missed it. She wants it tested." Graham looked from the hair to the schematic on his desk. This woman was fighting a war on multiple fronts. She was gathering evidence, passing intelligence, identifying weaknesses. She was a one-woman insurgency. "And the brand?" Helena asked, her voice low. "I've seen cattle brands, Graham. This was done with surgical precision. What is it?" Graham made a decision. He couldn't keep this contained. Not anymore. "It's from an old life, Helena. A very bad one." He turned the laptop screen towards her, showing her the satellite image of the remote estate. "I think this is where she came from. And I think Alistair Finch is running it." Helena's sharp intake of breath was the only sound in the room. She was one of the few people who knew the bare-bones version of Graham's past, of the mission that had supposedly killed Alistair. "That's impossible," she whispered. "He's dead." "Ghosts have a way of coming back," Graham said grimly. "And they tend to bring hell with them." He tapped the screen. "She's given us a target, and you," he looked at the bag with the hair, "you have evidence. We need to know who that belongs to." Suddenly, Miguel burst into the room, his face pale. "Graham, front gate, you need to see this." Graham strode to the main security monitor. The camera at the ranch's entrance, a full 2 miles from the house, showed the empty, rain-slicked road. "There's nothing there," he said. "Look closer," Miguel urged. "On the gatepost." Graham zoomed in. Impaled on the sharp iron spike of the gate was a dead rattlesnake. It was a common enough sight in Montana, but this was different. Coiled perfectly around the snake's body, tied with a piece of twine, was a child's rattle. A message. "We know about the baby." And beneath it, something else glinted. A single spent shell casing, placed deliberately at the base of the post. Graham zoomed in further until the head stamp was crystal clear. It was a 7.62 mm round, a caliber used in specific foreign-made rifles. It was the exact same type of casing he'd found at the scene of the botched operation 20 years ago. The one that had supposedly killed Alistair Finch. It wasn't just a message. It was a signature and a threat. I'm here. She's mine. The child is mine, and I'm coming for them. The ranch, once a sanctuary of solitude, transformed into a fortress overnight. Graham, Miguel, and a handful of trusted ranch hands, all former military, worked with grim efficiency. They weren't just ranching anymore. They were securing a perimeter. Motion sensors were activated, patrol routes were established, and communication protocols were set. The sprawling property, once a symbol of peace, now felt like a forward operating base. Upstairs, the silent woman began to heal. Maria, Miguel's wife, a woman whose quiet strength was a force of nature, tended to her. She brought trays of food, clean clothes, and sat with her for hours, speaking in soft, gentle Spanish, never demanding a response. The woman, whom they'd started calling Lena until they knew her name, remained silent. But her actions spoke volumes. She never turned her back to the door. She ate her food only after Maria had taken a bite first, and from his office, Graham would watch her through the window as she stood for hours, staring out at the distant mountains, her hand resting on her swollen belly. She wasn't just looking, she was memorizing the terrain, calculating lines of sight, planning. 2 days after her arrival, she left a note on her breakfast tray. The handwriting was precise, architectural. Thank you for the clothes. It was a start. A crack in the wall of silence. That same afternoon, Doc Helena called with the results from the hair sample. It's a match, Graham, but not to any criminal database. There was a pause. It's a familial DNA match to a case that was sealed by the State Department a decade ago. The disappearance of a Czech diplomat and his wife. They vanished from their post in Vienna. The case went cold. Graham felt the puzzle pieces clicking into place, forming a horrifying picture. Lena, he said out loud. Her name is Lena Kovac. Her father was a military attaché, specializing in secure architectural design. She wasn't just an architect. She was the daughter of one, raised in a world of secrets and security. Alistair hadn't just found a skilled woman. He'd found a legacy. Graham, Helena's voice was tight. There's more. The diplomat, her father. He consulted on a NATO project 20 years ago, a project to design next-generation detention facilities. Secure facilities, Graham finished, his voice like ice. Facilities that were impossible to escape. Unless you were the one who helped design them, Helena whispered. He looked out the window at Lena, who was now walking slowly in the walled garden Sarah had built, her steps measured, her gaze taking in every detail. She wasn't just admiring the flowers. She was assessing the fortifications of her new prison, or her new sanctuary. The following morning, another note appeared. The garden. The west wall is a weak point. The foundation is shallow. The climbing roses offer too much cover for an approach. She wasn't just a prisoner who had escaped. She was a security expert pointing out the flaws in his defenses. She was helping him protect her. He wrote a note back. What would you suggest? He left it on her lunch tray. An hour later, Maria brought him the reply. It was a detailed sketch of the garden wall, with modifications drawn in. A reinforced footing here, a trellis replaced with one made of hardened steel there. The climbing roses replaced with thorny, low-lying shrubs that offered no concealment. It was brilliant, simple, and effective. And at the bottom of the page, another sentence. My full name is Lena Kovac. I think it's time you knew that. But it was the postscript that made Graham's blood run cold. A postscript that reframed everything. He calls the baby heir apparent. He believes it is his, genetically perfect. The culmination of Project Cyclops. He is the father. He will never stop. Graham stared at the words, the world narrowing to the precise, controlled script on the page. Alistair wasn't just coming for his escaped asset. He was a fanatic, a cult leader, coming for the child he considered his messiah. A child conceived and carried as the ultimate weapon. His phone rang. It was Sheriff Patterson, his voice strained. Graham, we need to talk. I just got a call from a federal judge, a name I haven't heard in a long time. He's inquiring about a ward of his, a young Czech woman. He says she's mentally unstable and a danger to herself. He has papers, full power of attorney. What's the judge's name, Jim? Graham asked, though he already knew the answer. Martinez, the sheriff said. Judge Antonio Martinez. Graham's hand tightened on the phone. Judge Martinez, a man with a sterling reputation, known for his philanthropy and his work with international adoptions. He was also Helena's husband. And Graham now knew, with sickening certainty, that Alistair's reach extended far beyond a remote compound. It reached into his own inner circle. The call wasn't an inquiry, it was a warning. I can get to you anywhere. I can turn your friends against you. I have the law on my side. He looked at the sketch in his hand, at Lena's warning. He looked out at the garden where she walked. The sheriff's words echoed in his head. He has papers. There was only one way to legally fight a power of attorney. Only one way to give Lena and her child a shield that no judge, no matter how powerful or corrupt, could pierce. It was insane. It was unthinkable. But it was the only move left on the board. He had to marry her. The idea was a tactical gambit, born of desperation. A marriage certificate would supersede any power of attorney, any guardianship papers Judge Martinez could produce. It would legally bind Lena to him, giving him the authority to make medical decisions and, more importantly, to refuse access to anyone. It was a shield made of paper, but in the world of law and influence Alistair operated in, it was the strongest shield they had. Graham found Helena in the ranch's small medical clinic, stocking supplies. He laid the plan out for her, his voice flat and devoid of emotion, a military briefing. Helena listened, her face pale, her hands still. When he finished, she sank onto a stool, her expression a mixture of horror and dawning comprehension. Antonio? She whispered, the name of her husband of 30 years, a question mark of betrayal. He called the sheriff? He's compromised, Helena. Or he's part of it. Right now, it doesn't matter which. What matters is that he is a vector of attack. Graham's words were brutal, but they needed to be. They are using him to establish a legal claim on Lena and the baby. Marriage? Helena's voice was shaky. Graham, she's been through hell, being tied to another man, even for protection. It could feel like another cage. It's a cage to keep the wolves out, Graham countered. She would have complete autonomy. Her own accounts, her own wing of the house. This is not about possession. It is about protection. A legal firewall. He paced the small room. But I will not force her. It has to be her choice. Ask her, Helena said, her eyes hardening with a resolve that reminded Graham why he trusted her. Explain it the way you just explained it to me, as a strategy. She'll understand that. Then her face crumpled for a moment. My husband. Graham, what do I do? For now, you do nothing, he commanded softly. You act normal. You are our eyes and ears on him. You are our most important asset. He saw the steel return to her spine. She was a fighter, just like everyone else on this ranch. That evening, he found Lena in the garden. She was sketching in a notebook, not architectural designs this time, but the faces of the roses, each one rendered with delicate, heartbreaking detail. She was reclaiming her art, another piece of herself stolen by Alistair. He sat on the stone bench opposite her. Lena, we have a problem. She didn't look up from her sketch, but her hand stilled. Judge Martinez. It wasn't a question. Graham's respect for her grew. He's trying to establish legal guardianship. I know, she said, her voice quiet. Alistair always has a legal framework. It's how he launders his assets, both financial and human. He creates a paper trail of legitimacy that no one ever questions. She finally looked at him, her eyes clear and direct. What is your counter-move? The directness of the question, the military starkness of it, made his path clear. He wasn't proposing to a victim. He was conferring with an ally. Marriage, he said. A legal contract. It would invalidate his claim. It would give me the right to protect you and your daughter with the full force of the law. He laid it all out. The finances, the autonomy, the exit clause. It would be a marriage in name only, a strategic alliance. Lena looked down at her swollen belly, her hand resting on the life within. For a long moment she was silent, the only sound the buzzing of bees in Sarah's roses. "He told me I would be his bride," she said softly, her voice laced with a venomous calm. "That our child would legitimize his new world order. He had a ceremony planned, a grotesque pageant to show off his prize." She looked up, and a dangerous light glinted in her eyes. "To marry you, to use his own weapon of legitimacy against him. It would be a kind of poetry." She took a deep breath. "I accept your proposal, Graham, on one condition. Name it. We do it at dawn, in this garden, and Maria and Miguel will be our witnesses." Her voice was firm. "And Doc Helena, I want the people who are fighting with us to be there, our real family." "Done," he said, a weight lifting from his shoulders that he hadn't realized was there. "There is one more thing," she said, her gaze turning towards the house. "The judge's wife, the doctor, can she be trusted?" The question was a shard of ice. Lena's survival depended on her ability to see threats where others saw friends. She was questioning Helena. "I trust her with my life," Graham said, his voice absolute. "Alistair preys on love," Lena countered softly. "He finds the people his targets love most and he turns them, a child, a spouse. He will use Helena to get to the judge, or use the judge to get to her. She is compromised, whether she knows it yet or not." She stood, her regal bearing making her seem taller than she was. "I will agree to this marriage, but do not trust the doctor. Watch her. Her love for her husband is now your greatest liability." The wedding was a strange, solemn affair. As the first rays of sun crested the mountains, they stood in Sarah's garden. Judge Martinez's replacement, a retired justice from a neighboring county whom Graham trusted implicitly, read the simple civil vows. Lena wore a simple cream-colored dress Maria had found for her. Graham wore a dark suit. They looked less like a bride and groom and more like two sovereigns signing a treaty. Miguel and Maria stood as witnesses, their faces etched with a mixture of worry and fierce pride. Doc Helena was there too, at Lena's specific request. Graham watched her, remembering Lena's warning. Helena's face was a mask of controlled composure, but he could see the strain in her eyes. Was it the strain of knowing her husband was a monster, or was it something else? When the judge pronounced them husband and wife, there was no kiss. Graham simply took Lena's hand. He slipped a plain gold band onto her finger. A shield, a weapon. Her hand was cool and steady in his. As they signed the marriage license, making it official, a strange sense of finality settled over Graham. He was no longer just a protector. He was a husband, a father-to-be. The lines he had drawn around his heart for 5 years were dissolving. After the judge left, the small group sat at the garden table. Maria had brought coffee and fresh pastries, an attempt at celebration. "The papers are filed," Graham told Lena quietly. "Bank accounts, property deeds. Everything is being transferred into a joint trust. You are as much the owner of this ranch as I am." Lena touched the new ring on her finger, twisting it slowly. "I never thought I'd have a name again," she whispered. "Lena Westfield. It sounds strong." "It is," he affirmed. Helena raised her coffee cup. "To new beginnings," she said, her voice a little too bright. Graham watched her over the rim of his own cup. Lena's warning echoed in his mind. Her love for her husband is now your greatest liability. Later that morning, the first test of their new alliance arrived. A sleek black car pulled up to the main gate. Sheriff Patterson called. "Graham, it's Judge Martinez. He's here with 2 federal marshals. He has a court order to take custody of one Lena Kovacs." "He's a little late," Graham said calmly. "She's no longer Lena Kovacs. She is my wife, Lena Westfield, and you can tell the good judge that if he sets 1 foot on my property, I'll have him arrested for trespassing." There was a long silence on the other end of the line, then Patterson let out a low whistle. Well, I'll be damned. You checkmated him, son. Through the security cameras, Graham watched the confrontation at the gate. He saw the shock on Martinez's face when the sheriff relayed the news. He saw the fury, quickly masked. Martinez made a call, then got back in his car and sped away. They had won the first battle, but Graham knew this was far from over. Alistair wouldn't be thwarted by a piece of paper. He would escalate. The proof came that afternoon. One of the ranch hands found it on a patrol of the southern fence line. It was a single, perfect yellow rose, just like the ones in Sarah's garden, laid carefully on a fence post. Tied to its stem with a black ribbon was a small, silver locket. Miguel brought it to Graham's study. He opened it with a gloved hand. Inside were two tiny, faded photographs. On one side, a picture of a young Judge Martinez. On the other, a picture of a young Helena, her face bright with love. It was a message from Alistair, meant for him. I told you I could get to anyone. I own your friend. I own his wife. I own your doctor. Who do you trust now, Graham? He looked at the locket, then at the security monitor showing Helena's truck pulling up to the main house for her daily check-in with Lena. She got out of the truck, her medical bag in hand, a look of calm professionalism on her face. But as she approached the house, she paused, her hand going to her neck, to the spot where a locket just like the one in his hand would have hung. She looked around, a flicker of pure panic crossing her face before she smoothed it away. Lena was right. Helena wasn't just compromised, she was being controlled, and she was walking right back into their fortress, a Trojan horse with a stethoscope. The discovery of the locket changed the board entirely. Helena was no longer an asset. She was a potential threat, a pawn in Alistair's cruel game. But Graham couldn't just cut her out. She was Lena's doctor, and her daily visits were a crucial part of their routine, a routine Alistair was clearly monitoring. To change it now would signal that they knew. So Graham played a double game. He greeted Helena with his usual stoic warmth, but he and Miguel watched her every move. They installed microscopic cameras in the guest wing where she met with Lena. They swept her medical bag for bugs each time she left. It was a grim, ugly business, treating a friend like an enemy. Lena, for her part, was a master of controlled paranoia. During her checkups with Helena, she became a different person. She answered questions simply, never volunteering information. She steered the conversation to the baby, to the garden, to anything but strategy and security. She was playing the role of a healing victim perfectly, giving Helena, and by extension Alistair, nothing. She's a better operative than I ever was, Graham admitted to Miguel as they reviewed the footage one night. She's a mother, Miguel replied simply. There is no fiercer soldier. A week after the wedding, Lena came to his study. She laid a new set of drawings on his desk. They weren't garden plans. They were schematics of the ranch house itself. He will attack, she said, her voice flat. His legal approach failed. He will turn to a tactical one. He believes this house is his target. He believes I am in the East Guest Wing. You are, Graham said. No, Lena corrected. Starting tonight, I am moving into the West Wing with Maria and her family. We will make the East Wing look occupied. Lights on a timer, a decoy. We will feed his surveillance what he expects to see. Graham looked at the plans. She had mapped out the entire house, identifying tactical choke points, potential breach locations, and fields of fire. But she had done more than that. She had redesigned Sarah's garden. The irrigation system, she said, pointing to a complex network of pipes. We can reroute it, connect it to canisters, not water, gas, a non-lethal incapacitating agent, your military-grade inventory. She pointed to the trellises. Reinforce them with Kevlar sheeting. They become barricades. It was a brilliant, terrifying plan, to turn Sarah's place of peace into a weapon. He will come through the garden, Lena whispered, a painful look on her face. He knows it was your first wife's sanctuary. He will want to desecrate it. It's his nature. Graham felt a cold fury. Let him try. That night, under the cover of darkness, they moved Lena. The East Wing became a stage, perfectly set for an audience of one. Meanwhile, The ranch's true heart fortified itself in the west. Helena continued her visits, oblivious. She would report back to Alistair that the target was isolated, vulnerable, right where he expected her to be. The waiting was the hardest part. Days bled into a tense, watchful week, and then the betrayal deepened. Miguel came to Graham, his face ashen. He held a piece of paper, a feed delivery invoice. Tucked inside was a handwritten note. Everything is in place. When the time comes, make sure the woman and child are in the East Wing. Payment as discussed. The handwriting was painfully familiar. Jack Foster, their feed supplier for over a decade. A man who had attended Sarah's funeral, a man whose children had played in their fields. Maria noticed the deliveries were coming at odd hours, Miguel said, his voice thick with disgust. She said he wouldn't look her in the eye. Graham's world, which he thought could not get any smaller or more dangerous, shrank again. They had another leak. A trusted friend, a part of their community, was a traitor. "Do we confront him?" Miguel asked, his hand resting on the sidearm he now wore constantly. "No," Graham said, his mind working furiously. "Foster is a pawn. Alistair is using him for logistics, for information on our patrols." He looked at the note again. Make sure the woman and child are in the East Wing. Foster's note wasn't a betrayal. It was a gift. It was confirmation that Alistair's intelligence was wrong. He was still focused on the decoy. Foster, like Helena, was an unwitting source of disinformation. We let him think he's safe, Graham decided. We let him continue to report our normal patterns. He stood and walked to the window. In the garden, Lena was showing Maria's young granddaughter the names of the flowers, a picture of pure innocence. We use their own spies against them. He then called Sheriff Patterson. "Jim, I need a deep background check on Jack Foster. See what kind of leverage they have on him." The answer came back in less than an hour, and it was as ugly as Graham had expected. Foster's teenage daughter had been arrested for drug trafficking. She was facing serious time. Then suddenly, all charges were dropped. The order came from a federal judge, Judge Antonio Martinez. It was a web, woven with precision, each thread connected. Alistair wasn't just a ghost. He was a master puppeteer, and he had his strings in everyone. But as Graham watched Lena in the garden, he realized Alistair had made a fatal miscalculation. He thought he was pulling the strings on a collection of isolated, frightened people. He didn't realize he had tangled with a family, and families, as Graham was learning, had a way of weaving their own webs. The attack came on a moonless night. The motion sensors on the perimeter lit up in a cascade of red alerts. 4 teams, Torres, his head of security, reported through the comms. Professional configuration. They're using Foster's access codes to bypass the outer gates. Let them. Graham's voice was calm, a rock in the storm of electronic chatter. He sat in the newly established command center, the reinforced basement of the main house, staring at a bank of monitors. Across from him, Lena sat, her hand on her belly, watching the same screens. She was not a liability to be protected. She was his second in command. "They're approaching the East Wing," Miguel's voice crackled, just like Foster's intel said they would. The first team, clad in black tactical gear, swarmed the East Wing, breaching the door with silent, deadly efficiency. They moved through the empty rooms, sweeping towards the master bedroom where they believed Lena was sleeping. "Now," Graham said into his mic. From hidden vents, the incapacitating gas hissed into the sealed-off wing. On the monitors, they watched the elite soldiers falter, their movements becoming sluggish. One by one, they collapsed, dropping without a sound. "First team neutralized," Torres reported. "Second team is reacting. They're moving to the garden." "As predicted," Lena whispered, her eyes glued to the screen. The second team flowed into Sarah's garden, using the rose bushes for cover, moving towards the main house. They were walking into a place of beauty, intending to bring violence and death. They didn't know the garden was waiting for them. "Activate the roses," Lena said, her voice like steel. Graham keyed the command. The garden's sophisticated irrigation system, repurposed and rerouted, came to life. But it wasn't water that sprayed from the hundreds of hidden nozzles disguised as sprinkler heads. It was the same invisible, odorless gas. The garden became a beautiful, fragrant death trap. The second team went down amidst the blooms of Sarah's favorite yellow roses. "Third and fourth teams are pulling back!" Miguel's voice was triumphant. "They're regrouping! They're confused!" But then, something went wrong. A new alert flashed on the screen, an unauthorized breach, not from the outside, but from within. "The clinic!" Torres yelled. "Someone's disabled the cameras in the medical clinic!" Graham's blood ran cold. He looked at Lena. Her face was a mask of grim understanding. Helena. On the screen, a new figure emerged from the shadows near the clinic. It was Doc Helena, her face streaked with tears, a pistol in her hand. But she wasn't alone. Behind her, holding a gun to her head, was her husband, Judge Martinez. And behind him, stepping out of the darkness like a creature from a nightmare, was Alistair Finch. He was older, his hair gray at the temples, but the same predatory grace was there, the same cold, intelligent eyes. He held a small remote. "Checkmate, Graham." Alistair's voice, smooth and cultured, came through the open comm link Martinez was wearing. "You may have my soldiers, but I have your queen, or in this case, your doctor." He gave a cruel smile. "I told you I could get to anyone. Love is such a predictable vulnerability." He pressed a button on the remote. In the east wing, where the first team lay unconscious, a small C4 charge, planted by Helena on one of her visits, detonated. It wasn't a large explosion, just enough to blow out the windows and signal his victory. But as the smoke cleared, Alistair's smile faltered. He was expecting screams, panic. He was met with silence. He looked at the monitors in the command center, which he had clearly hacked. He saw Graham and Lena, not in the main house, but in the fortified basement. He saw their calm, watchful faces. He had breached the castle walls, but the king and queen were not in the throne room. They were in the dungeon, and they had just locked the door behind him. His eyes narrowed. He had miscalculated. "No matter," he snarled into the comm. He pushed Helena forward. "Plan B. I'm walking out of here with my doctor, and if any of your men try to stop me, her blood will be on your hands." He started dragging Helena and her husband towards the tree line. It was a classic hostage maneuver, buying time, creating an exit. But he'd made another mistake. He assumed Graham's only asset was his soldiers. "The West Garden," Lena said, her voice urgent. She was pointing at a secondary monitor showing a heat signature map. "He's not heading for the road. He's heading for the river. He has a boat stashed." She traced a path on the screen. "But he has to cross the old stone bridge." Graham looked at her, then at the schematics she'd drawn. The stone bridge was part of the original property. It was old, beautiful, and according to Lena's structural analysis, incredibly fragile at one key point. "Miguel," Graham said into his mic, "do you have a clear line of sight to the bridge support?" "From the hayloft in the north barn," Miguel confirmed. "I've got the 50 cal. It's a long shot, but possible." "Don't hit the bridge," Graham commanded. "Hit the ground 10 feet in front of it. The seismic shock should be enough." "Graham, no!" Helena's frantic voice came over the comm. "He'll kill me." "He's going to kill you anyway, Helena," Graham said, his voice laced with a terrible sadness. "This is your only chance. When you hear the shot, drop." On the screen, they watched the three figures reach the edge of the clearing by the river. The stone bridge was just ahead. Alistair was confident, moving with the arrogance of a man who had never known defeat. The roar of the 50 caliber rifle ripped through the night. On the monitor, they saw the ground in front of the bridge erupt. The shockwave hit the ancient stone structure, and with a groaning crack, the keystone gave way. The center of the bridge crumbled into the rushing river below, cutting off Alistair's escape. Just as the shot hit, Helena dropped, pulling her husband down with her. Alistair, caught by surprise, was exposed. Alone. From the darkness on all sides, the rest of Graham's security team, led by Torres, emerged. Their weapon lights pinned Alistair in a cage of blinding white. He was trapped. Utterly and completely. He looked around, like a cornered wolf, and then he did something no one expected. He started to laugh, a low, chilling sound that echoed across the water. "Well played, Graham," he said, raising his hands. "Well played. But you're a fool if you think this is over. You think you've captured me? All you've done is bring the war to your front door." He looked directly into the lens of a nearby security camera, his eyes boring into Graham's. "The organization behind me. They don't tolerate failure. You haven't cut the head off the snake. You've just captured one of its fangs. And now the rest of them know exactly where you are." His laughter was cut short as Torres's team subdued him, but his words hung in the air, a promise more terrifying than any explosion. This wasn't the end. It was the beginning of a much larger war. And then, Lena gasped. She clutched her stomach, her face paling. "Graham," she said, her voice tight with pain. "The baby. It's coming." The chaos of the attack gave way to a new kind of focused pandemonium. While Torres's team secured Alistair and Sheriff Patterson's deputies began processing the scene. The ranch's command center transformed into a makeshift maternity ward. "The stress, it's induced early labor," Helena said, her medical training taking over despite the tremor in her hands. She was now a prisoner, guarded by Maria, but she was also the only doctor on site. "We have to get her to the hospital. Now." The plan had always been to use the county hospital, 30 minutes away by car. But Alistair's warning echoed in Graham's mind. "Now the rest of them know exactly where you are." The roads were no longer safe. The hospital itself could be compromised. "The helicopter," Graham said. "We fly to the tertiary center in Bozeman, an hour away, but it's a secure facility. Torres, get them airborne." "Graham, no!" Lena gasped through another contraction. "Too exposed. A helicopter can be tracked, targeted." "She's right," Helena agreed, checking Lena's vitals. "The baby's in distress. We don't have an hour." She looked Graham in the eye, her face a mess of guilt and desperation. "There's a private clinic, 20 minutes from here. It's owned by a colleague, state of the art. And it's clean, Graham. I swear on my life. Alistair doesn't know about it." Graham stared at her. Could he trust her? The woman who had betrayed them? But the look in her eyes, it was the look of someone trying to claw her way back from damnation. And the raw fear for Lena and the baby was real. "Give me the address," he snapped at Helena. He relayed it to Agent Chen, the FBI contact Patterson had brought in. "Chen, I need a security sweep of this location, now. And I need a federal marshal escort. Go loud. Lights and sirens. Create a diversion along the main route to the county hospital." It was a desperate, high-stakes bluff. They would make it look like they were going to the original destination, drawing any of Alistair's remaining assets towards the decoy, while they slipped away to the clinic. The next few minutes were a blur, getting Lena into the back of an armored SUV. Maria clutching a bag with baby clothes, her face set like stone. Graham riding shotgun, a military-grade rifle on his lap. Miguel driving, his knuckles white on the steering wheel. As they sped down the ranch's long driveway, they could see the flash of police lights on the main highway, heading east towards the county hospital. The diversion was working. Miguel swerved west, onto a dark, unmarked service road. In the back, Lena cried out as another contraction seized her. "Talk to me, Graham," she panted. "Distract me." He found himself telling her about Sarah's roses, about planting them, about the first yellow bloom, about how his first wife believed that beauty was its own form of defiance. He spoke of the life he'd had before, the peace he'd lost, and the strange, unexpected hope he was feeling now. "Your wife. She was a wise woman," Lena breathed. "Both of them are," Graham said, the words slipping out before he could stop them. He felt Lena's hand find his in the darkness, her grip surprisingly strong. The clinic was a low, unassuming building, tucked away in a stand of aspens. Just as Helena had promised, it was clean. The doctor, a man with kind eyes and steady hands, was waiting. They whisked Lena inside into a delivery room that looked more like a luxury suite. But as they wheeled her through the doors, Graham's radio crackled. It was Torres. "Graham, we have a problem. Alistair's escaped." "What?" Graham roared into the radio. "He had something implanted in his tooth, a fast-acting neurotoxin, faked a seizure. By the time the EMTs got to him, he was gone. He didn't escape, Graham. They let him go. The transport team was compromised. He's in the wind." Graham's blood turned to ice. Alistair was free, and he knew their every move. The diversion, the clinic. He would know it all. He burst into the delivery room. "We have to move. Now!" But it was too late. The doctor looked up from examining Lena. "She's fully dilated. The baby's crowning. We're having a baby, Mr. Westfield. Right here, right now." The world narrowed to the four walls of that room. Outside, a war was brewing. A master villain was closing in. But inside, a new life was fighting its way into the world. Lena screamed, a raw, primal sound of effort and pain. Graham was at her side, holding her hand, his mind a frantic mess of tactical calculations and raw, untethered emotion. He was a soldier, a rancher, a commander. But in that moment, he was just a man, terrified and in awe, watching the woman he loved, perform a miracle. "One more push, Lena," the doctor urged. "One more!" With a final shattering cry, the baby arrived. A wave of sound filled the room, a tiny, furious, healthy wail. "It's a girl," the doctor announced, his voice filled with joy. He cleaned her quickly and laid her on Lena's chest. In that moment, the world outside ceased to exist. There was only Lena, her face luminous with sweat and exhaustion, and a love so fierce it was breathtaking. And the baby, their daughter, so small, so perfect, her tiny hand gripping Lena's finger. Lena looked at Graham, tears streaming down her face. "Sarah," she whispered. "Her name is Sarah Maria Westfield, for the woman who planted the roses and the woman who protected them." Graham's carefully constructed walls crumbled completely. He leaned down and kissed his wife, a real kiss, full of fear and relief, and a love so profound it felt like coming home. Then he kissed his daughter's head. The perfect, fragile moment was shattered by the sound of screeching tires outside. Miguel burst in, his gun drawn. "They're here!" Graham didn't hesitate. He scooped his daughter, wrapped in a blanket from Lena's arms. He handed her to Maria. "West wing of the clinic. There's a reinforced safe room. Go, now." He turned to Miguel. "Hold them off as long as you can." He looked at Lena, his heart breaking. "I'll be back," he promised. He ran out into the clinic's main corridor, just as the front doors exploded inward. Alistair stood there, silhouetted against the flashing lights of his vehicles, his face a mask of triumphant fury. He wasn't alone. He had a team of at least a dozen heavily armed men. "You have something that belongs to me, Graham," Alistair snarled. "My heir." "She's not your anything," Graham spat, raising his rifle. "Oh, I think you'll find she is," Alistair said with a chilling smile. And from behind him, another figure stepped forward. A figure Graham knew all too well. It was Jack Foster, the feed supplier, the traitor. But he wasn't holding a gun. He was holding a detonator. "The whole clinic is wired, Westfield," Foster said, his voice shaking. "Alistair's got my daughter. If I don't walk out of here with the baby, he kills her. And I kill everyone in this building." It was the ultimate checkmate. Graham was trapped. He could fight, but he would lose. He would lose Lena. He would lose his daughter. He would lose everything. The standoff in the clinic corridor was a frozen tableau of impossible choices. Alistair, triumphant. Foster, a desperate man turned into a walking bomb. And Graham, a soldier who had run out of tactical options. "The child, Graham," Alistair said, his voice smooth as silk over razor blades. "A simple exchange. Her for the lives of everyone in this building. A small price to pay for your wife's survival. Wouldn't you agree?" Graham's mind was a whirlwind. He could see no way out. He was about to lower his weapon, to concede defeat, when Lena's voice came through his earpiece, weak but clear as a bell. She had grabbed a radio from the delivery room. "Don't do it, Graham," she said. "Stall him." "Lena, you need to stay safe," he whispered back. "He thinks the baby is his prize," she said, her voice gaining strength. "His heir. His ego is his weakness. Use it." Then her voice dropped to a conspiratorial whisper. "The ventilation system, Graham. Look at the ventilation system." Graham's eyes flicked upwards. The clinic's corridors had large industrial air vents, just like the ones in the schematics Lena had drawn of Alistair's own compound. He understood instantly. "You're right, Alistair," Graham said, his voice loud enough for everyone to hear. He slowly lowered his rifle. "She is your heir, a perfect specimen. But are you sure she's the only one?" Alistair's smug expression faltered for a fraction of a second. "What are you talking about?" "Project Cyclops," Graham continued, stepping forward, away from the corridor leading to the maternity ward. He was drawing them further into the building. "It was never just about one. It was about creating a bloodline. Did you really think Lena was your only success?" There was another, a male, the true heir. It was a complete fabrication, a wild, desperate bluff. But as Lena had said, it played to Alistair's monumental ego and his obsession with his legacy. The idea that he had been lied to, that a more important prize existed, was a seed of doubt Graham had to plant. "You're lying," Alistair hissed, but his eyes darted around, the confidence shaken. "Am I?" Graham said. "Why do you think I let you get this far? I needed to draw you out, to get you away from your base. The boy is here, in this clinic. We were making the exchange tonight." While Alistair was processing this, Miguel, understanding the play, was working. He slipped away down a side hall, heading for the clinic's HVAC control room. "Where is he?" Alistair demanded, taking a step forward. Foster, tethered to him by fear, followed. They were moving right under the main air duct. "You'll never find him," Graham said. "He's not like the girl. He's been trained. He's a ghost, just like you used to be." That's when Miguel flipped the switch. From the vents above, it came. Not gas this time. Alistair would be prepared for that. It was a fine, aerosolized powder, a fast-acting sedative mixed with a powerful paralytic agent. Colorless, odorless, and absorbable through the skin and eyes. It was a custom compound Graham had commissioned years ago for hostage situations, an emergency measure he never thought he'd use. Alistair realized what was happening a second too late. He opened his mouth to shout a warning, but his body was already betraying him. His men, caught in the downpour of invisible powder, began to stiffen, their rifles clattering to the floor as their muscles seized. Foster, his eyes wide with terror, fumbled with the detonator, but his fingers were already numb. The device slipped from his grasp. Graham kicked it away, sending it skittering down the hall. Alistair was the last to fall. He sank to his knees, his eyes burning with a hatred that was terrifying in its intensity. He tried to speak, but only a choked gurgle came out. His body was paralyzed, but his mind was clearly active, trapped inside a useless prison of flesh. It was over. Sirens screamed in the distance as Agent Chen's federal teams, no longer needing the decoy, descended on the clinic. Medics and agents in hazmat gear flooded the building. Graham ran back to the maternity ward. Maria was standing guard at the door to the safe room. He pushed past her. Lena was sitting up, holding their daughter, Sarah, protectively. She looked exhausted, but her eyes were bright with triumph. He knelt before them, his body shaking with adrenaline and relief. He couldn't speak. He just reached out and touched his daughter's cheek. So small, so perfect, so fiercely protected. "I told you," Lena whispered, a small smile on her lips. "His ego was his weakness. And you," Graham said, his voice thick with emotion, "are his downfall." They sat there for a long moment, a new family forged in chaos and fire, the sounds of federal agents securing the building fading into the background. The war wasn't over, but the monster was in a cage of his own flesh. Later, as they were preparing to transport a stable Lena and baby Sarah back to the ranch, Agent Chen approached Graham. "Alistair is non-responsive, but his vitals are stable," she said. "He's going to a very dark, very deep hole for the rest of his life. We also picked up Judge Martinez trying to flee the country. And Helena, she's cooperating fully. She gave us everything. The network is crumbling." Chen then handed him a tablet. "We found this on Alistair, encrypted files. We're still cracking them, but we found the primary key. It was the word heir." She swiped the screen. A list of names appeared. "These are the other women, Graham. The other specimens in Project Cyclops. Locations, buyers, transport schedules. It's all here." Graham looked at the list. A concert pianist from Russia, a biochemist from Sweden, a prima ballerina from Argentina. 6 women, their lives stolen, their skills perverted by Alistair's madness. "We're moving on them now," Chen said. "Because of you, because of Lena, we can save them." He walked back to the ambulance where Lena was resting, their daughter sleeping peacefully in a portable bassinet beside her. He showed her the tablet. Tears streamed down Lena's face as she read the names. "Katerina," she whispered, touching the name of the pianist. "Anya." "They're going home, Lena," Graham said softly. "You're sending them home." She looked up at him, her eyes shining with a strength that humbled him. "We are," she corrected. "We are." As the ambulance pulled away, heading back to the sanctuary of the ranch, Graham Westfield looked at his wife and his daughter. He had spent years running from his past, hiding in a fortress of solitude. But his past had found him. It had brought him terror and violence. But it had also brought him this: a warrior queen and a tiny princess, a new mission, a new life. The war had come to his doorstep, but in the end, it hadn't destroyed his home. It had shown him what home truly meant. 1 year later, the ranch was transformed. The security was still there, woven seamlessly into the landscape, but it no longer felt like a fortress. It felt like a promise. The main gate bore a new sign, carved from local timber: Westfield Ranch, a Sarah's sanctuary. The story had become legend. The quiet, wealthy rancher and his mysterious, brilliant wife who had brought down a global trafficking ring from their Montana home. They had turned down every interview, every book deal. Their privacy was their most prized possession. The East Wing, once a decoy in a deadly game, had been fully renovated. It was now a transitional home for the women rescued from Project Cyclops. Katerina, the Russian pianist, often filled the house with the music of Rachmaninoff. Anya, the Swedish biochemist, was helping Doc Helena, who was serving her sentence by volunteering her medical expertise under strict supervision, develop new therapies for trauma survivors. The garden was the heart of it all. Lena, with baby Sarah often strapped to her back, had expanded it, designing therapeutic spaces where the women could heal. It was a place of staggering beauty and profound strength, where the scent of roses mixed with the sound of quiet laughter. Graham found Lena there, watching their daughter take her first wobbly steps on the soft grass. Sarah stumbled, fell, and looked up at her mother, her face scrunched up, about to cry. "You're all right, my little warrior," Lena said, her voice a soft melody. Sarah looked at her mother's calm, confident face, and instead of crying, she pushed herself up and tried again. "She has your spirit," Graham said, wrapping his arms around his wife. "She has your strength," Lena replied, leaning back against him. They stood there for a moment, a complete circle, watching their daughter explore the world they had made safe for her. The mail had arrived earlier, and with it, a letter. It was from Jack Foster, sent from a federal prison. He was writing to apologize, to explain the fear for his own daughter that had driven him to betrayal. Lena had read it, then had simply said, "Forgiveness is a garden, too. It takes time to grow." The past was not forgotten. It was integrated. It was the soil from which their new life had bloomed. Alistair was a ghost again, this time for good, locked in a federal medical prison, his brilliant mind a silent prisoner in his paralyzed body. The organization he served had been shattered, its wealthy patrons exposed and disgraced. Justice, slow and methodical, had been done. Agent Chen called, Graham said quietly. They want you to consult, to help them design more sanctuaries like this one. I know, Lena said. I told her I would. She smiled. But I also told her my family comes first. Always. She turned in his arms, her eyes dancing. Besides, she said, a playful glint in her eye, I have a new project I'm designing. Oh? Alistair thought he was creating the perfect heir, she said, scooping up Sarah and kissing her chubby cheek. I think we did a much better job. She looked at Graham, her love for him open and radiant. And I think Sarah might like a brother to boss around. Graham's heart swelled. He looked at his wife, the architect of his new life. He looked at his daughter, the future of their sanctuary. And he looked around at the sprawling Montana landscape, a place that had once been his refuge from the world and was now a beacon of hope to it. He had thought his story was over, a quiet epilogue after a lifetime of war. He'd been wrong. It was just the beginning, and it was more beautiful than anything he could have ever designed. If this story of survival, justice, and the unexpected power of love touched your heart, make sure you hit that subscribe button and ring the notification bell. We have so many more stories to share, and trust me, you won't want to miss what's coming next.